Hello and welcome to another SME Media webinar. I'm your host, Amy Bryson, contributing lead editor of Smart Manufacturing Magazine, and today we will be exploring how to overcome labor challenges by easing hiring requirements. And this presentation is sponsored by Aerotek, a leading recruiting and staffing agency. Our presenter today is Dan Stiles. Dan is the Director of Strategic Sales for Aerotek, and he has more than 22 years of experience in helping Aerotek's clients overcome their staffing challenges. And for the past 8 years, Dan has focused specifically on supporting Aerotek's largest automotive OEMs and automotive suppliers throughout North America. Now, during this webinar, Dan will share his insights into how the ongoing labor shortage in manufacturing, which is getting a lot of coverage, is intensifying the competition for talent. He'll also provide guidance on what manufacturers can do to overcome their staffing challenges, including the benefits of reviewing and easing hiring requirements. Now, before I turn things over to Dan, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items for our attendees. On the right side of the screen, you'll find the question and answer box. If at any time during the presentation you'd like to ask Dan a question, just type it into that Q&A box and it will be answered at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time, the questions will be sent to Dan and he'll respond to you via email. Now, if you experience any technical issues during the webinar, use the Q&A box to alert us and we'll respond individually with a suggested fix. If that doesn't work and you're not able to regain access to the live webinar, the presentation will be available in recorded format at about 4 o'clock Eastern today. You can watch the webinar as many times as you'd like. All you need to do is sign in with the credentials you used to join today, and feel free to share those credentials with your colleagues or anyone who might also benefit from this topic. Now, it's my pleasure to turn things over to Dan. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you, Amy and Sam from SME for this opportunity. And I also want to acknowledge a few folks on our end, Derek Gordon, Earl Henthorn, and Stanley Johnson for their support in helping building this webinar. For those of you who aren't familiar with Aerotek, as Amy shared, Aerotek is a national staffing and recruiting company that focuses on industrial positions from general labor, light industrial, to skilled trade positions such as welding, maintenance, and supervision. We have over 200 non-franchised offices in most major metropolitan markets across the US and Canada. And a little bit about me, I've been with the company for 22 years, helping build talent acquisition strategies for many diverse clients, industries, markets, and skill sets. And for the past 7 years, I've been supporting clients with national locations. Therefore, I'm fortunate to have national visibility on this topic. And my present assignment is building programs for our largest automotive manufacturing customers. The purpose of this webinar is to discuss how certain hiring processes and requirements can be streamlined to overcome your hiring challenges. And I want to be careful to make sure that this audience hears me when I say this webinar, it's not a sales pitch. There's many factors that has created the environment we all live in today and the factors that we expect to continue here in the future. And I do acknowledge that the conversations around the current state of the economy, and it really can depend on who you're talking to in respect to their predictions. But the facts are that there are still more manufacturing job postings today than available talent. Also, the baby boomer generation that historically made up the majority of the manufacturing employment population just isn't participating at the same rate. They are retiring, and the generations that has come after the baby boomers have not gone into manufacturing at the same rate as before. And additionally, the baby boomer generation to this day still outnumbers Gen X and the Gen Z population. Therefore, it's my hope to create an agreement that this content is very relevant today, and it's mutually beneficial for us and for any company that's looking to identify talent. So let's take a look at the current hiring landscape. As I mentioned, there's more job postings than available talent. There's actually 0.59 unemployed workers per current job posting. So in other words, there's more postings than available people. And quits remain above 4 million for the 18th consecutive month. Why would that be happening? And simply, that's because there's still more employment options available to workers. And some of it can be due to other manufacturing positions paying more than their current position. The average hourly earnings of production and non-supervisory roles rose by 5% year over year. And another factor we've seen is that some manufacturing companies are so behind in their work due to not having enough workers that the amount of overtime is becoming problematic for the worker population. We've seen the significant amount of required overtime limiting the available talent pool and driving up those quits. So the competition for talented workforce has been and remains extremely strong. Please take a look at the most up-to-date data points from December in the middle of this slide. We all know that unemployment and the labor force participation rate is still historically low, but look at how there's 263,000 jobs that were added in December. And to give a comparison to pre-COVID, at the close of 2019, before the pandemic started, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reported that 12.8 million people were employed in the manufacturing industry. Now in 2022, and finishing up this year, 12.9 million people were employed. So it's awesome to see the manufacturing industry's recovery, but hopefully we all can agree that it's still challenging for us to identify talent. Let's take a look at the hiring landscape of other industries. On the top right of this slide, we're showing that manufacturing is 8% of the labor market. So there's other industries that are larger that are still looking for talent. Then below, we're also comparing unemployment in manufacturing to some of those other industries. And this is a year-over-year snapshot from September of 2021 to September of 2022. And we can see that unemployment obviously has dropped in manufacturing, but we're also seeing it in the construction and food services industries as well. And this is an interesting point to share because some of the entry-level manufacturing talent can come from the construction and food services industries where transferable skills are applicable. A great opportunity for the manufacturing industry can be recruiting workers that have been classified as working in the transportation and warehousing industry, though. Unemployment year over year there has actually increased. So this can be a really good opportunity for us to recruit talent when transferable skills make sense. So again, there's no doubt hiring in manufacturing remains competitive in 2023. And the best organizations will implement hiring strategies that will quickly attract, onboard, and retain quality workers. In this next slide, we'll discuss the actions that companies can take. Having the appropriate market wage is obviously critical. Wages have continued to grow, and we encourage you to research the wages your organization is paying based off the expertise you're requiring with your hires and existing workers. Research shows wages in manufacturing are expected to grow again here in 2023. In a recent quarterly survey from the National Association of Manufacturers, the survey reported that companies expect employee wages to rise by 3.5% over the next 12 months. Also, there may be innovative solutions that can be implemented as well. If your wages cannot compete with other companies, can you decrease the amount of required experience? Can there be more of an appetite to hire more entry-level candidates? If so, this solution would work well when partnering with a staffing company because of the contract to hire method. You're able to test and train a candidate during their contract period. And the contract to hire model is an effective model overall because you're able to confirm an individual is a good fit during their contract period prior to being hired direct or full-time. Another benefit to a staffing supplier partnership is that recruiting is a numbers game, and therefore the right staffing firms should have more recruiters available to identify, screen, and interview candidates when compared to a company with maybe one or two internal recruiters. Also, the best staffing firms build long-term relationships with candidates and build effective talent networks. So those hard-to-find skilled workers, for example, could be identified through those particular networks. Next, you should have an efficient hiring process. The hiring process is the first impression of your company to a candidate, and communication is critical. It's that first impression of how important a candidate is to the organization. The candidate's value will be communicated through the hiring process. And think about how that could impact referrals of other candidates as well. We've mentioned that there's more posting than available workers. So it's important to limit the amount of time between that first interaction and making a hiring decision on the candidate. The longer this time period is, the greater the chances of the candidate disappearing. And we also recommend having a clear plan of communication with other members of your hiring team to ensure as much efficiency as possible. And finally, you should expand your candidate pool because more candidates are critical. Take a look at your job requirements. Are there transferable skills that can be used from other industries? The industries that we've mentioned are construction, distribution and logistics, and food services industries, for example. But we've also mentioned that by loosening your organization's required job experience in certain departments can help offset the wage inflation that we're all experiencing. Additionally, can you expand your pool by hiring a part-time workforce for certain departments? For example, if your business needs a worker to average 70 hours a week to complete the required work, can you attract a different pool by finding 2 people to work 35 hours each week? Those alternative shifts or part-time shifts can attract the retired baby boomer generation that may be looking for additional income. Also, this idea could really open up a different talent pool by identifying parents with limited or no childcare options. We all know how COVID has impacted the childcare industry, but the childcare costs have significantly increased recently. On average, monthly childcare costs are more expensive than the average mortgage in every zip code in the US. This fact definitely has impacted our historical available candidate pool because many are choosing to stay home and watch their children. Therefore, by offering creative shifts, you can expand your candidate pool. And finally, we feel it's important to ask the question, can you ease or loosen some of your hiring requirements? A very popular trend that we're seeing is the loosening of drug and background checks. Now, we do have clients that support certain regulated industries where there's no negotiation with respect to drug and background checks. But for the manufacturing companies without regulations, there's clearly a strategic advantage by loosening drug and background screens to widen your candidate pool and saving critical time. In regards to drug screens, we have to acknowledge that some of the state and local THC regulations have changed. And in a recent Gallup poll, 16% of Americans reported being exposed to THC, and this is up from 12% last year. In regards to criminal background screens, can you utilize a 3-year background screen versus a 7-year? The old standard of a 7-year background check has been found to rule out members of certain socioeconomic groups. So not only will this widen your candidate pool, but it will also save you time. There are still counties in this country that still process background investigations by paper. And that can create significant time delays and increase the likelihood of a candidate disappearing. Staffing companies can help ensure quality talent with ease job requirements, because it's in every staffing firm's best interest to identify the best talent match, because attrition increases costs for that staffing company and obviously the client as well. The most effective hiring scenarios occur when the staffing supplier conducts the interview and has the approval to make the hiring decision based off the client's requirements. But this is only effective when the staffing supplier and the client are in agreement on what a successful candidate looks like. Another process that can be offloaded are any required pre-employment skills and assessments, and staffing companies may have candidates available that have successfully completed previous assignments that recently went through those required assessments. And finally, why is improving speed to market or speed to hire so important in a candidate's market? Organization and communication of the hiring process is so critical to the candidate. The candidate should feel their value from the beginning, and the first impression is so important. So a slow and unorganized hiring process significantly increases candidates choosing another opportunity because they don't feel valuable. We know other companies are hiring that do not have an interview as a part of their hiring process, and this is known as a go-to-work in the recruiting industry. So there's heavy competition if you're choosing to conduct interviews. There may be some of you that could be thinking there's a major cost and time impact by making the hiring process too fast. You may ask, could we get stuck with an underperforming employee by speeding up our hiring process? And that's a fair question. But remember that partnering with a recruiting supplier creates more flexibility for your company. And there must be a strong alignment with the staffing supplier and hiring company on what a successful hire looks like. Most engagements we work with are contract to direct hire. So utilize the contract period to actually see the individual work. And in the event a candidate isn't the perfect fit, the contract period can be used to separate efficiently and effectively from that individual worker. In conclusion, hopefully this webinar will spark good dialogue and effective conversations within your organization on reviewing your hiring processes and requirements. As we shared in this webinar, hiring in manufacturing will remain strong this year, and we're confident that these actions will widen your candidate pool and help your organization deliver for your customers. Thank you to everyone who has attended this webinar. We hope that you have found it beneficial.
Wonderful.
And
thank
now,
you, Dan.
Amy,
Yeah, thank you so much. Absolutely. We've got plenty of time for questions. And before we jump into our attendee questions, I just wanted to drill down on a few things that you mentioned that certainly caught my attention in my role as, an editor for Smart Manufacturing and also participating in content for manufacturing engineering, as well as our podcasts and webinars. Workforce development is a huge pain point for manufacturers. And the struggle is real, and it's only getting worse, as you mentioned through your statistics. There are so many job opportunities, career path opportunities, and not enough quality candidates to connect those two together. So, in terms of the innovative ways to attract quality candidates, when you talk about maybe looking at folks with maybe their experience level isn't yet there with the specific role, are you seeing manufacturers offering training as an incentive to attract candidates into the fold? So kind of using the recruiting period to look as attractive as possible to demonstrate to the candidate that they're invested in their not just employment, but their long-term success with their organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Amazon has actually done a great job with some commercials that I've seen recently where they talk about individuals that are hired in at an entry-level position and then they have the opportunity to train and learn new skills, and their wages actually increase. And I do believe that being able to create career mapping within any organization absolutely impacts the retention that is so critical as well within every organization.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Let's jump into some questions. So Dan, what are some of the challenges of loosening drug and background checks?
Yeah, some organizations that they may not have that capability and flexibility based off of what industry they may be supporting, and there's some contractual regulations there. So there may not be as much flexibility for those industries, but as we've shared, there are some manufacturers that don't have those regulations, and if they can loosen those drug and background requirements, you're absolutely going to expand your candidate pool and available talent that's out there. We are seeing it as an organization more than ever, and really Stanley Johnson from our team has done a phenomenal job of sharing the success stories with some of those companies that have recognized that they're able to attract more talent and have more candidates to choose from by doing so.
That's great. Given the fact that most manufacturers are SMMs, or small and mid-sized manufacturers, many with fewer than 25 employees, how can small manufacturers compete with larger manufacturers for that top talent?
Yeah, I think we kind of mentioned it earlier that career mapping is critical, I think, to retain talent, but also to identify talent as well. So some of those smaller organizations with headcount could have an opportunity to create leadership roles from other organizations that are larger. So there's definitely opportunity for individuals to identify talent with individuals that potentially may be looking to create more leadership opportunities for themselves individually. So that's one thing that I would definitely say. But another thing too is that smaller organizations, I think, have just the capability to be able to build more culture within their organization as well, because there's just less people, so it's a little bit more efficient to be able to touch everybody. Mm-hmm. So I believe that having a great culture within your company certainly impacts your ability to be able to drive more referrals and attract more talent when those individuals see and feel that culture when they're interviewing or visiting that company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and manufacturing is certainly an industry where post-COVID, there isn't a lot of flexibility for work from home, which is a big trend for folks like me who have the luxury of being able to do that. We in communications can do that, but in manufacturing, it's so important to be able to be immersed in a culture that you fit in with, because you're there physically for so much of your day. So I think that's a big point that you make. Okay, another question: how long should it take to transition a candidate to an employee?
That really can depend, very honestly. It could base off of their training and the position that the individual is working, and it can depend on the company. It also can depend on how long the company actually needs the individual as well. So it really does vary. I don't want to cheat, and give you that answer, but that is just the reality of it. Okay. But getting feedback and getting performance reviews on your individual is very critical in order to even have the individual go transition from a contract worker to a direct hire employee. We've seen it within our organization as well, that driving those performance feedback reviews and getting feedback, it gives the individual an opportunity to understand if there's opportunities to improve and to correct it. And really, I think every employee wants to know how they're doing. They want to know if they're doing a good job, or is there areas where they can improve. So that feedback and performance review is very critical in general, to have somebody transition from a contract worker to a full-time direct employee.
That's a great point. Okay, another question. What screening processes have you seen manufacturers have the most success cutting?
Yeah, there's no doubt since COVID, we've really seen a success with clients loosening their drug and background screens.
Okay.
So, for example, no longer testing for THC. We talked about that a little bit earlier, where state and local governments, they've changed those requirements. So that has really impacted and has had a lot of success. And then obviously the criminal background checks, taking them from 7 years to a 3-year criminal background check has really been impactful. Matter of fact, I read an email less than an hour ago of a company that went from a 7-year down to a 3-year and significantly has increased the available candidate pool that's available to them.
Oh, that's great. Okay, now how can a quicker hiring process improve retention?
Well, there's no doubt improving the hiring process and making it more efficient, you're limiting the amount of time a candidate looks for another job while they're waiting for word back from the company. So there's less distractions of other opportunities, which is going to increase the retention. So that's important. But we mentioned it earlier too, that the candidate will feel valued and important right away. Once that organization that they've interviewed with, when they've expressed interest in that candidate and making them feel valuable, making them feel good, and then following that up with feedback, it's just really important to make sure that you capture that candidate right away and make sure they know how valuable they are. And that can really impact retention as well, because showing that investment early and it really acknowledges how valuable they are. But additionally to that point too, is that proper training and career mapping that I mentioned earlier, those discussions throughout even their orientation when they first start with the organization is very important to really impacting retention. I have recently recommended to some of our clients that if it's possible, try to get leadership within the organization to see if they can carve out some time in their day to visit those orientations so that those new hires really feel and understand their importance and their value within the organization. If there's an opportunity to draw the correlation between what they do every day, whether it's manufacturing a part or a component, and how that impacts what they're doing and how they're impacting their customer, or that makes a huge impact where they understand their importance and their value, especially even coming from leadership. So leadership can play a huge role within retention within the organization. Yeah.
Okay, we have another question. Is there a roadmap to implementing these types of changes? I mean, there's one, cliche about manufacturing, because it's probably true, is, manufacturing is a little bit change averse, right? So to really invest in recruiting, retention efforts and making changes is hard. So what advice would you give to manufacturers who just simply are a little bit change averse?
Yeah, that's fair. That's a fair question. I totally get that. I don't know if anyone has heard the recent term of quiet hiring. There's a lot of terms called quiet now. And there's the newest term is quiet hiring. And a great quiet hiring, one of the examples of quiet hiring is partnering with a staffing and recruiting company, honestly, to identify your talent. And honestly, that can be a great way to try to test some of these recommendations that we're sharing, because the staffing company is the entity that's taking on that responsibility and that heavy lifting. So that can be a great way to really test and see, does this help us with retaining or attracting and retaining quality talent by changing up potentially some of these processes that we've had historically in the past.
Yeah, I think you've made great points about communication throughout the process, which I think is really key. From the moment you interact with a candidate until they're hired, that's not the end of the game, right? It's manufacturing is faced with a retention problem as much as it is an attraction problem. So I think partnering with someone like Aerotek who has such years experience, in many industries, including manufacturing, I think, especially for maybe some of those SMMs who are struggling with competing with bigger firms to get that top talent and to demonstrate their value prop of being a long-term career path versus a job. I think there's a tremendous opportunity right now, given the state of manufacturing. So, Dan, I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing such great insights with our attendees. And I want to invite our attendees to, remember that SME and SME Media are here to help you stay up to date in all things manufacturing. Make sure that you check out our podcast and listen to a wide variety of manufacturing professionals discuss the challenges and best practices impacting manufacturing today. You can do that and find links to all of these resources by visiting sme.org. And make sure you check out Aerotek as well and all the resources that they have. And remember that you can watch this webinar on demand at any time using the credentials that you used to log on today. And we thank you for joining us. Hope you found it informative, and we hope you'll join us again soon. Take care.